Welcome to the In Truth podcast, where the only agenda is the pursuit of truth. Welcome to another episode. Episode Why Work in Light of Sell All That You Have and Follow Me. I'm joined by a super cool panel today. I've got George, Kira, David, all aspiring university students that I'm sure will be wrestling with a question like this. If we can just start by getting you guys to tell us a bit about yourselves, starting with George, please.
So I'm George. I was born in Perth, Western Australia, to two Coptic parents. I graduated high school back in 2021, and now I'm studying mechanical engineering and accounting. I'm in my third year at the moment. And in my free time, I like to play basketball, and that's about it, really.
Welcome. Lovely to have you with us. Kira.
Born in Egypt. Been here for around 10 years. Currently studying civil engineering in Curtin in my second year.
You got another 2 to go?
Yeah.
Yep.
I like to use my time wisely. In church, in the gym, studying, and just playing basketball.
David.
Yes, I'm David. I was born in Sydney, and I came to Perth around a year ago so far. I'm studying dentistry at Perth at the moment. And in my free time, I love to do some sports such as table tennis or badminton or cycling.
Amazing. Just a bit of a disclaimer for everyone tuning in. I'm sure this has happened to every podcaster out there one day or another. We actually started recording and we were about half an hour into the recording, and then we realized we don't have any audio. So we've had to start again. And just to recap with the panel, everything that we discussed in the last half an hour, we discussed, why should we work? And I think the first point that I was sort of honing in on was the fact that in order... I'll get you all to say what you said on why we should work very quickly, starting with George.
Yes, what I mentioned was from personal experience, when I don't have anything to work towards or no purpose per se for the next coming month or so, I have no idea what to do. I'm just laying in bed watching either basketball or just video game videos or anything, and I have no idea what to do. In contrast to when I'm studying and there's exams coming up, I'm constantly, doing all these practice quizzes, talking to my professors, asking questions to my friends. Even though I don't enjoy it as such,
there is a sense of purpose behind it.
Yeah, I'm just awaiting the day I finish my final exam and then I'm free. But once I get to that point, I'm lost. I'm stuck. I'm not sure, what to really do.
I'll put you to work whenever you're bored. Come to me,
please.
Kira.
So the reason why you should work hard is because you want to be a person of excellence. Because the alternative is just being lazy and doing absolutely nothing, wasting your time, which is not what God intended. So you do have to work as hard as you possibly can to, like I said before, be that person that's someone of excellence. And to do that, you obviously have to work extremely hard. You have to go through pain. You have to go through the whole thing before you can be that guy or that person.
Yeah. And I think it's well grounded and well understood that anything good does not come easy. You have to battle through at least some sort of resistance to get to that good spot, to get to where you want to be. And I don't think anyone really gets there with a very, very, very odd minority without working hard, right? Without having a goal in mind and working towards it. David.
Yes, so just to build upon what these two are saying, again, I work because I want to fulfill a particular purpose. And if I were to go to the university example, I study because I know that I have an exam in mind and that I have to demonstrate these capabilities and proficiencies in the workforce, and for my own knowledge as well.
Yeah.
And I also mentioned that when it's the holidays and your schedule is all over the place, this is actually one of the least eventful times, because you can be doing activities which can be useful, but if they don't lead to any particular outcomes, it's not as fulfilling as doing something that will benefit you in the long term.
Yeah, but also for you and all of you being undergrads, what you mentioned in terms of exams, that's short term. But in the long term, dentists have a big role to play within our economy. But they also have a big role to play. I mean, I know you went to Cambodia to help out the needy, help out the homeless, help out less privileged villages. And I know from what I understood, there's a huge demand for dental work over there, work that no one can afford there, right? And so you become a means through which a lot of people become better off. You contribute to their health and well-being, right? I think a point that we all mentioned before we realized that there's no volume is this: we want to be in this state of growth, and we want to permanently be in the state of growth. I referenced two people. I referenced Jose Mourinho, who was at Manchester United. He had just won the Europa League, and a reporter asked him, given all the trophies that you've won before, this Europa League surely doesn't feel like much. And then Jose Mourinho said to him, look, the day that trophies don't mean much is the day I say goodbye to the job. Every trophy means a lot. Every trophy is a reflection of all our work. I'm constantly trying to improve as a manager, and I'm constantly trying to get every player to grow and be better. And this trophy represents that we have grown, at least against our opponents and against ourselves, right? That's what this trophy represents. You're the one, and then he said to the reporter, you're the one making it out like, this trophy is better than that, or that trophy is better than this. And of course, I've won many trophies, but to me, what they represent is what I work towards. And they represent triumph and growth. And that's what I'm most proud of. I can't remember who the second person I referenced was.
It was Elon Musk.
Elon Musk.
Yeah.
What did I reference him?
You said
the money man, actually.
Floyd Mayweather.
Yes.
Yeah,
Well, they were contrasting, but before Jose... No, I referenced... Jordan Peterson. That's who I mentioned. And Jordan Peterson came up with this thing where he said, look, one thing you're guaranteed to grow from is self-reflection in a very critical way. You sit down with yourself at the end of the day and you are self-critical on everything that happened that day, and you will find yourself on a state of growth. And if you do it every day, well, then you're on a state, you're growing every day. You will definitely benefit from it. And just to jump quickly to the next thing that we discussed, I think we discussed this idea of, from a worldly view, we always, and what society's always pushed down is this idea of we work because we need to get what we want to. I do what I need to get what I want. Or I do what I must to get what I want. And so there's this ideology within society and within the economy in general that I must work to get what I want. If I want a car, I must work for it. If I want jewelry, I must work for it. If I want to travel, I must work, right? And so we have, what's become very common, I think, is we have aspirations. We look at something and we want to do it, and then we work towards that. And, I think I referenced Elon Musk. What did I reference him in terms of? I can't even remember.
I think you were saying something like people look to him as what it means
icon
to be
of success.
successful. Yeah.
And because he's got so much money, he's the standard of success that we want to be. He's the standard of success that everyone would love to be in or would love to get to. But one of you mentioned that, the money isn't his end goal. It's his ambition. He wants to get to Mars or he wants to get to place. The money just comes as a byproduct, as opposed to someone that I also referenced, Floyd Mayweather, where money is his end goal. And it's clear that money has become his God in that sense. It's his driver, it's his means, it's his ends. He works solely for the money, and he derives a sense of worth, a sense of importance, a sense of everything good deriving from the fact or deriving from his wealth, right? What else did we discuss?
Oh, David said that where your heart is, there your treasure will also be. Is that the correct verse?
Yes.
Yeah.
In Luke chapter 12.
Yes.
Do not fear.
Do you want to just start again from there, because I think we've caught up quite nicely.
Yes.
Yes. Oh yes. So I quickly referenced ideologies out there such as solipsism, and solipsism is this idea that everyone doesn't actually exist. You're all a figment of my imagination. I'm the only one that's actually existent. You don't exist. You're all just figments of my imagination. And the reason why I brought that up is because there's various ideologies out there, and what ground do we have to tell anyone that it's a good thing to work? I think we came quickly to the conclusion that it's very well understood, and I said I'd stake my reputation on the fact that there's many studies out there that a sense of purpose is very important, extremely important in one's life. And I think that goes on to the point that you all were speaking about, right? A sense of purpose is very, very important for someone to have a mission and something to work towards in life is very important. So from a worldly view, that's certainly a very good reason to work. That's certainly a very good reason, to preach to someone or to talk to someone to get them to work. Did we mention anything else, or are we pretty much caught up from there?
No, I reckon we summed up everything.
I do remember saying before David started speaking about Luke chapter 12 was that the worldview, they worship, or not worship, but their end goal is to make as much money as possible.
Yes,
but us
the
as
money is the end.
Christians,
Yeah.
But as us as Christians, our end goal is eternal life with God. So
yes,
as a Christian, the money it is a byproduct, similar to Elon Musk, but our main goal is to one day be with God up in heaven. So whether we make billions or not much at all shouldn't affect our sense of purpose anyway.
Yeah, absolutely. And
at the same time, we shouldn't be opposed to growth. I also mentioned that some of the things that are presented in the books and so on about setting goals and having clear objectives, such as the football manager. He might have set goals about how his players would be and what trophy he'd want to achieve and so on.
Yeah.
And so that's also a very important component of work too, that you have a purpose.
Yes.
And you're working towards something specific.
Yes.
Comparing, of course, to what he did beforehand.
Yes. So just to sum up and move on to the next part, I think we got up to the part, and we'll get to that point, which is, well, let me sum up this part. It's why should we work? And, from a worldly point of view, it's simple. We work because we must to get what we want. We do what we have to get what we want. It's interesting that with that same worldview, it's perfectly acceptable that if you don't want to work and be homeless, for example, that's okay within that worldview, right? Because if I don't want anything, I should just live in, being, for example, not working, although having every resource available to me to work, but being voluntarily homeless, and I also I remember mentioning this specific part of man deteriorates when he is not working. Sitting in bed all day is a state of deterioration for the body. And I know because one day at a time I was 9 months bedridden, and what I got when I, was okay to walk again, my muscle had my calf muscles were effectively jelly. My quads were non-existent. All my leg muscles were just in a state of they were almost like potato mash. And I remember the doctor saying to me, "Look, you've got to learn to walk again, as if you're a baby." And the doctor said something striking, which was that, being in bed for that long means that your muscles have just deteriorated completely. And it's so interesting. You sit in bed and your body deteriorates. Anything to add from any of you on that?
We also discussed the point that it was a command from God that we work.
I think we're about to. Yep. So we're about to get to that. So ultimately, work is purely done for self-gain from a worldly point of view. I think was the conclusion that we came to. Economically speaking, socially speaking, from a world point of view, taking away any sort of beliefs or taking away any sort of religion, work is purely selfish, right? I work because there's some sort of gain in it for me. And, you know, the problem with that for me, just from the onset, is the fact that that can become a morally bankrupt or an ethically bankrupt ideology or philosophy to live by. And just by virtue of the fact that I work to get what I want, why can't I cheat to get what I want? Why can't I perhaps cut a few corners to get what I want? Why can't I perhaps do the unethical thing to get what I want, right? And so I think we've covered everything from that. And I think what we did was we moved on to the next part, which is from a Christian work of view, why should we work? You had a point to say on that, and then so did David, and then hopefully we should be back on track.
Yeah, so I referenced in Genesis when God cast out Adam and Eve and said, they cast them out to till the ground from which he was taken. And then you went and mentioned verse 17, I believe it was, in chapter 3.
Yep.
Where...
Yep. To the man, to Adam, he said.
Yeah, and in the sweat of your face you shall eat bread till you return to the ground. For out of the ground you were taken,
for dust
you are, and dust you shall return.
Yes. So right on there, we see here that because of the fall, work was going to be hard, work was going to be difficult. You're going to see blood. You're going to have a lot of sweat. There's going to be resistance to your work. You had something to say as well, David?
Sure. The reason for why we worked, I did a little bit of reading. There were two main reasons that I had, and then we can break it down a little bit more.
Yes.
First reason is so that we can glorify God. And the second reason is that manual labor prevents us from many faults that we can be doing. Can we go back to the glorifying God part? The book of Matthew says that you are the light of the world, that you are the salt of the earth.
Yes.
And we actually have a purpose here. I believe Pope Shinoda mentioned that we are here and we exist to love God and to love other people also. And importantly, in the book of John, chapter 13, verse 35, it says, "By this all will know that you are my disciples if you have love for one another." And so actually being involved in the workforce or being involved with secular people is a chance for us to...
It's a contribution.
And contribute as well.
Yeah,
exactly.
and you're also contributing in a positive way to society, right? To the economy. You're contributing in a positive way to the economy. Kiro?
So just on that point, what does it mean to glorify God in what you do? Like, me and George were talking earlier on, and I was saying, let's say you're a janitor. How do you glorify God in wiping floors or cleaning? I don't get that part. So how do you glorify God in something like that?
Yes. I think that's a very good question. And I think man has categorized these classes of what a good job is, what a non-good job is. And I think a lot of people have classified it in terms of
salary.
Yeah, in terms of salary, in terms of study, in terms of all sorts of categories. But if you must do something that no one wants to do, for example, clean the floors, that's considered what? It's considered a low thing. You're considered part of a low socioeconomic status, right? You're considered less of a contributor to society. But let's break that down a little bit, right? You're doing something that no one wants to do, right? And you're doing it for a wage that's perhaps less than what your actual work, less than what your work is regarded less valuable than someone else's time, perhaps doing a job that's probably similar in labor, but even, let's say, less shameful in terms of work, whether it's, cleaning toilets or cleaning the floors or something like that. Here's the thing. I was getting to this, but we've gotten there a bit quicker. Any work that you do, doing it honestly and doing it in service of someone else, absolutely is glorifying God. Absolutely. And I would argue that being the janitor, being the job that no one wants to do for a wage that's less than what you're worth, or less than what your time's worth, is actually glorifying God. How, you might ask, Hero? Well, number one, it's an act of humility. Right? Number one, it's an act of humility. Your humility is seen by others. That is exactly the encompassment of something like you are the light of the world. Right? And so Christians will do these jobs that no one wants to do in an act of humility, but not just in an act of humility. Maybe life hasn't served them as well as some of us, right? Maybe life hasn't allowed them to get the education that we're afforded, the luxury of education that we're afforded, but at a tertiary level, maybe even at a secondary level, right? Provided that it's done with honesty, provided that it's done with humility, with a smile on your face, it absolutely becomes a means from which you can actually preach to the world. Absolutely. In Adelaide, I used to actually get my Sunday school kids to clean rubbish, right? Especially if they misbehave, I'd have them, I remember there's one specific incident that I remember. One kid was particularly, naughty, mischievous. I gave him 2 strikes and then I told him you'll be picking up rubbish. He did it a 3rd time. Told him you have to pick up 300 pieces of rubbish.
Goodness.
Yep. And there was conditions. He couldn't go outside to get the piece of rubbish. They had to be within the church. And there couldn't be leaves. There had to be pieces of rubbish. And I remember sitting down with him and making sure that he counts and making sure that I count as well, all the pieces of rubbish that he had to clean. It was so interesting that at the end I told him, are you ever going to do that again? And he said to me, no. But then next week, he came to me and he's like, see, Abuna, the church is clean because of me. I cleaned all this courtyard that had all this stuff in it. Right? And it was amazing to me that even just from that, even though it was a shameful thing of being punished, he actually got some sort of pride from doing that. He looked at a place that was clean and said, thank God, see, well, at that time I was Matthew. See, Matthew, the courtyard's clean because of me. And so it doesn't matter what you do as much as it matters why you do it in Christianity. And I think that's where we're heading with the conversation, right? It matters much less why you do something than what you're doing. And the perfect encompassment of this is Christ, who comes and he just absolutely shocks everyone when he says something along the lines of, you've been told not to murder. Thou shalt not murder, right? But I say to you, whoever hates his brother in his heart has committed murder against him. Another example, you've been told you shall not commit adultery. But if anyone looks at a woman to lust her, he has already committed adultery in his heart, right? So at the core of Christianity is this idea of what's very important is why we do something as opposed to what we're doing it for, right? Why you're doing it matters, because you can absolutely be doing the right thing for the wrong reasons. For example, I could be fasting just so everyone could see that I'm fasting and derive my righteousness. That's why the Pharisees, by the way, they woe to you because you fast in front of people, right? You shouldn't fast like the way the Pharisees fast, which is for reputational gain, right? For reputational elevation. That's why they fasted. That's the reason. And although it was the right thing to do, it was done with the wrong reason. So being a janitor from a Christian point of view, absolutely, Kiro, absolutely can glorify God, right?
If I could just mention a point here.
Yes.
That story about the Pharisee, we see also the tax collector. He was standing in the corner and he would beat his breast saying, God, merciful to me, a sinner. course, we can liken that to
Look at the
janitor,
parallels.
the
Yeah.
same case.
Yeah.
He wasn't very respected by the people at that time,
Yeah.
of course, but he was well pleasing to God, and it was because he had the contrite heart and wasn't necessarily about doing what pleasing other people, but the intention was simply to glorify God and to do what was pleasing to Him.
Yeah, I do have a verse on this that I think adds an extra point
Yes,
to
please.
it. In Colossians chapter 3, verse 23 to 24.
I've got it right here.
Yeah. It's saying, and whatever you do, do it heartily, as to the Lord and not to men, knowing that from the Lord you receive the reward of inheritance, for you serve the Lord Christ. So, we made the point, it doesn't matter how we're seen by society, but only to God, because God gave us this life, He gave us these talents, and He can, take anything away from us, give whatever to us. But He's the one who ultimately, He's the ultimate judge.
Yes.
He knows our core intentions and our heart, how we feel about it.
Amazing. So let me pose this question to the panel. Why should we work from a Christian point of view? I think we just started discussing that before we realized that the audio was cut off. Why should we work from a Christian point of view? George, you mentioned Adam, and you mentioned his curse and the fact that as a byproduct of the fall, we have to work now, and work is going to come difficult.
Yes.
David, Kira, you want to speak to that before I do?
Why you should work hard from a Christian perspective?
Or work at all? Why should you work at all from a Christian point of view?
I think I agree fully with David what he said about working to glorify God.
Yes.
I also resonate very, very heavily with God saying you have to till the earth when He kicked us, when we sinned, fallen down.
Yes.
So it's just a command from God, and
we should work.
Yeah.
Yes.
And you mentioned earlier on as well that Adam was also working before the fall, so it is something that's part of our nature.
Yes.
It's very hard to go about life without working.
Yes. So it was very clear. I think to me, Adam was working before the fall, right? He had all the animals to name. He had the garden to work it. The place was a beautiful place to be. He was walking in communion with God until the fall. And of course, for me, what happens at the fall is that work became now difficult. Work comes with resistance, right? Just getting out of bed is a difficult thing to do, despite the fact, I was talking before and saying that you almost have to fight your physiology to get out of bed, right? Everything in your body is telling you want to stay in bed, despite the fact that what's good for you is actually to get out of bed, right? And so work is not just a byproduct of the fall. I think a byproduct of the fall is the fact that it's become hard. But work is necessary, right? It's necessary it was necessary even pre-fall from a Christian point of view. And to re-emphasize that point, I think I mentioned Genesis chapter 2, verse 1. Thus the heavens and the earth and all the hosts of them were finished, and on the seventh day God ended His work which He had done, and He rested on the seventh day from all His work which He had done. Thoughts on that?
I'm getting this from Kirby Bryant. He got asked by a reporter why he just won. He just won a
game 2, right?
Game 2, and you have to win 4 games in the finals, and he won game 2.
Yes.
And he was in the post game conference.
Yes.
And he wasn't smiling at all. He was just sitting like
stone-faced.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So one of the reporters asked him, "Why is there no smile? Are we not going to see a smile?" And he said, "Well, why should I smile? Job's not finished."
Oh.
I don't know if you've seen that one.
Yeah.
That video. Yeah. So
Look, I've seen many stars. Yeah. Many stars do that.
So I think it's just. So the point I was trying to get to was, once you finish what you've done, then you can rest. You can't take a break in between. Let's say you started uni, for example. You said, this semester I'm going to work as hard as I possibly can. I'm aiming to get 90+% for every single test, assessment, so on and so forth. And then, let's say 4 weeks in, you start to get a bit weary. Job's not finished. You still have a couple weeks left to go. before the end of the semester. So you can't just take that break in the middle. You have to finish that job.
Man, I love seeing stuff like that. Like, I'm gonna go watch that movie as soon as that interview, that conference. I just love focused men. I love it. Right, focused people. It's just amazing to have that stone face, and you could see it. It's in his body language. It's not just, it's not just he's saying it for good vibes, or he's saying it so he can get brownie points from the media. The man is properly focused, and there's nothing you can do to steer him away. He's got a goal in mind. He's working towards it, and he will not have anything stop him. Right, and for me, there's just something so admirable about that.
Would you not agree that that's the person of excellence?
I would.
And I also think the hard-earned rest feels way more like accomplished than if you're just like lazy and taking these halfway breaks and shortcuts. Like,
absolutely. Mind you, rest is very important. And I want to highlight this point to you guys, by the way. And the reason why I quoted Genesis 2 chapter 1 is ultimately the Christian works because God works. God doesn't need to work. He speaks and it's done, right? And yet look at what it says, Genesis chapter 2. He rested from what he had done, right? And isn't it amazing that he creates everything in 7 days? And in the seventh day, he takes a rest.
Creates everything in 6 days.
Sorry?
Creates everything in 6 days.
In 6 days, and on the seventh day, he rests, right? There's a funny joke about that, actually. There was a professor. He's a biblical professor, and he came in, and one student asks him at a lecture saying, you mean to tell me you've come here to tell me, and you're a scientific professor trying to tell me and sell to me that a God made everything in 7 days? And they were asking in a very mocking sort of way. And then the professor looks at him and is like, nah, he actually did it in 6. So anyway, I think it's very important for us to realize that these words exist there for a reason, right? And we don't just have it in the Old Testament, right? Genesis chapter 1, we have it in the New Testament as well, right? We'll get to that in just a moment, but Jesus says, I must work the works of the Father who sent me. Yeah, I must work the works of the Father who sent me. And I've got that quote that I'll mention in just a moment, but I think something for us to wrestle with here. Genesis chapter 2 verse 1, it says that God works and God took rests, right? And actually it's one of the fourth commandment of the 10 commandments is you shall keep the Sabbath. Day of rest is not just something that's needed, it's something that reflects God, right? This idea of going to work 5 days, 6 days, and then resting, having your day of rest, that's a reflection of the image of God and the image which we bear as humans, right? I find that amazing from a theological point of view. And so now we have a very solid ideological foundation as to why we work, and that is because God works. And not just because God works, but he created us in his image, and thus we work, and thus we rest, right? Because both of these are needed. You can't just be fully work and no rest, and you can't be just fully rest and no work. Both of these states are states of deterioration, right? And it's interesting that you don't just need to rest from work physically, you also need to rest from work mentally. I know none of you are in the workforce really as yet, but you will know exactly what I'm talking about. You'll need this mental switch off time. The reason why I said it in quotation marks is it's one of my mother-in-law's favorite phrases. You need the switch off time, right? You need the switch off time. Thoughts on that?
Completely agree. Like prime example would be when you hit the gym, you need to rest so your muscle can recover. So yeah, I fully agree with what you're saying.
Yeah.
But I have a question here. Does that mean you, like, let's say you work 6 days, rest on the 7th. What if you can push yourself beyond those 6 days? Should you go to your full capacity, or is it just like a routine thing? You're not burnt out, but you've done these 6 days. Do you continue, or do you take that rest?
Look, I don't know, to be quite honest. I'd be very interested to see the study of what humanity can push it towards. But I know the God ordination, and I know there's days in the week, and the days a week are 7, just like God created everything and rested on the 7th day, right? For me, it speaks theology, working and then resting, working and then 5 days, or having rest over the 2 days, or working 6 days and having rest on the single day. There are some radical Christians out there that will not work on Sunday, despite the fact that, you know, it severely undercuts them in their career, or severely holds their career back, and they still won't do it. Or they'll reject very high-paying jobs because they require the jobs. The jobs can be, for example, on call on Sunday, or something along those lines. My thoughts on it is you need to rest. It's not just a bodily thing. It's not just a physical thing. It's also a mental thing. You need to rest.
But I think the question comes is, when do you rest? Like George was saying, when do you rest? Well, should it be a routine thing? Should it be once you reach like the maximum that you can take of workload?
Because that comes back to...
Are you talking from a gym point of view, or are you talking
just
from...
in general?
Just in general.
Yeah.
Because that comes like, why work hard? Or do you just work to satisfy, like, let's say I would work, 25-hour weeks, and that's all I need to, feed a family, keep a roof over my head, and keep my mind occupied? Or do I need to actually work hard? Does working hard glorify God, or working at all glorify God?
But couldn't there also be other forms of work? So that 25 hours a week, that could just simply be at the office. But you've got 7 times 24, 168 hours. A third of those is meant for sleeping, and then the rest you can do it for any other form of activity, not necessarily at the workforce or for your employer, but it can also be something that's beneficial to you. I think, though, that the Lord said, he rested on the 7th day. It's a message for us that on Sundays that we should have that day dedicated to the Lord, which is why it's very important for people to attend the liturgies on Sundays and so on. But the rest of the time, He gave us a day and a night. I mean, if the 25 hours is sufficient, I think it's fine, as long as the rest of the time is used doing other useful things too.
Yeah.
Look, we're as Christians, this idea of excelling is something that is absolutely something that should be an aspiration. I think you mentioned Colossians 3:23, and let me read it to you. Bond servants, obey in all things your masters according to the flesh, not with eye service as men pleasers, but in sincerity of heart, fearing God. And whatever you do, do it heartily, as the Lord and not to men, knowing that from God you will receive the reward of the inheritance, for you will serve the Lord Christ. But he who does wrong will be repaid for what he has done, and there is no partiality. It's interesting here, right? The Bible calls you, and Scripture calls you, that you are called to excellence. You are called to excel, right? You are called to be a person of excellence, a person who just doesn't do the job just for the mere sake of doing it, but does it with passion, does it with aspirations to do it perfectly, right? That's a Christian doctrine, right? That's a Christian doctrine to excel, right? To do well, to have this idea of ambition. In your work lives, you should be working to be better, and you should be working towards promotions, and you should be working towards an ambitious target that you've perhaps set yourselves, or even your managers have set you, right? And that goes hand in hand with this permanent state of growth that we spoke about in the beginning, right? It goes hand in hand with that. Otherwise, you get stuck in what is called content with mediocrity. Content with mediocrity. And there's a certain level of laziness that comes with that. And it quite often strikes when you're complacent. When you get comfortable, you don't want to do any more, and so on and so forth. There is one thing, though, that we haven't discussed. we spoke before about the world ideology is we work to get what we want. It's purely selfish. The Christian doesn't work selfishly, right? There should be more of a means to his work, and there should be more of an application for his work than to satisfy oneself, whether it be from a pride or reputational, whether it be from a financial, whether it be from a comfort or luxury point of view. Your thoughts on that?
I think it's just all men here. We have to provide, right? Like,
yes.
So we can't just work for our own gain or aspire to make money for our own gain. No, or at least in the future for us, we've got family to take care of.
Yes.
We've got a wife, kids. We're gonna eventually take care of our parents. So, just as men, it's definitely our duty to provide and care and protect.
Yeah, my dad says the same thing. I say, like,
yeah,
I see him working late nights on like Saturdays and stuff. So I'm like, you know, why don't you just relax? Like, you have a day off. He's like, well, this is all for you and your brother, mate. Like,
that's a good father, my friend.
Yeah. So he says, you know, he has everything he needs. He has a family. He has food. He has a house. He says every like dollar he gets now, just it's not for him anymore because he doesn't need it, and he's not going to be here forever.
You're lucky to be his son.
I am.
Just on that point, this is on George's notes. It says in 1 Timothy 5:8, but if someone doesn't provide for their own family, and especially for a member of their household, they have denied the faith. They are worse than those who have no faith.
Yes.
So that's a very like bold statement there to say. If you don't provide, you've pretty much denied the faith.
Absolutely.
You've denied what you believe in, which is Christ. So
astonishing verse, confronting verse.
it is.
Right? To any fathers out there that, for example, that isn't their aspiration. Heaven forbid, let's say their aspiration is to gamble. Let's say their aspiration is to hang out with the boys for beers and meals and, you know, God knows what else, whatever other financially exuberant activities there are. You know, that's an example of a man who has abandoned his fatherhood, right? That's an example who's abandoned Christ, right? Because a Christian does not work for himself. And I think that's a very important point here. Absolutely, you're called to be ambitious. Absolutely, you're called to excel. And absolutely, you're called to be financially even successful, right? Not just as a byproduct, but as a byproduct, of course, because you're in this constant state of growth. You're also having ambitions to get to. And of course, the more you hit your targets, the more financially successful you will be, right? The test of a Christian is what happens with this financial success. Is it all for you? Is it all for you personally? Or if you have a family, is it all for your family? Right? Are you thinking of the people that are in need? Are you thinking of the people that perhaps have nowhere near what you have financially, what you have spiritually, what you have mentally, what you have economically? There are some countries out there where there's no clean water, right? And so, Christian, these kinds of thoughts have to resonate, right? There are orphans out there. There are widows out there. There are places where there's no clean water. And you don't even have to go afar to realize these things. There's people that are sick that need help, right? There's people that are at a rock bottom state in life where they need help, whether it be your time or whether it be your financial help, right? So a Christian always has to think about that. And if a Christian is just sitting there watching his bank account and his net worth grow and only caring, let's just say within the family, and saying, I provide for my family, I've done my part, I would challenge you there. How could you be sitting in all this comfort and making sure that your family's sitting with all this comfort when someone else's family your brother or sister family, right? Or your brothers and sisters that are international, because of course as humans we're all brothers and sisters. We all come from Adam and Eve.
There's
How
actually a funny story about that. I heard, well, my dad told me again, there was the owner of Colgate, the founder. He made too much money, and he was a grounded Christian, and he prayed and he said to God, you've given me too much money. I don't know, I can't spend this all. So he ended up giving 90% of his earnings as almsgiving and just living off the 10% that he, that instead of the other way around, because,
so
as we're told.
Admirable. Yeah. So admirable. And here's what's, for me, admirable about that. If you get down to the core, it's this idea of sacrifice, right? And where do you get this idea of sacrifice from?
Christ.
Right. It's Christ on the cross, because that's the ultimate act of sacrifice, right? John 15, no greater love than for one to lay his life down for his friends. And so this man has given up wealth, but Christ goes on to give his life, everything. He goes on to give up everything. That's what makes Abraham and Isaac's story so absolutely ridiculous, right? So absolutely stunning. It's this idea that Abraham was willing to put everything down on the altar, everything in Isaac down on the altar, this idea of sacrifice. And so we discussed this idea of why we should work from a worldly and an economically point of view, right? From a Christian point of view, what has to be at the forefront is this idea that our work is a sacrifice. Well, how so? Well, I put my talents towards good use first and foremost towards the economy, right? I don't just, as the parable of the talent suggests, put my talent in the ground, dig up a hole and put it in the ground and do nothing with it, right? You are absolutely called to work, right? You get to rest when you go to heaven. For now, you absolutely are called to work. And if you don't work, you know what God tells that person who didn't work?
I actually have something from St. Paul who...
But just before you do that, do you know what God said to the servant who buried his talent in the ground?
It was along the lines of, go away from my face.
You wicked and unfaithful servant. And then he got his servants to take him away.
Yeah.
Harsh words.
Yeah.
Harsh words. Sorry, your point, what you were going to say, David.
Actually, in St. Paul's epistles to the Thessalonians, he actually writes a letter that basically, if you read it, seems as though he's prescribing work for the people.
Yeah.
In 2 Thessalonians chapter 3, verse 7 to 12. It's quite long, but you'll see here that actually St. Paul, was a tent maker. And he was actually, when he was in Corinth, didn't want to stay at anyone except for Aquila and Priscilla, who are also tent makers.
Yes.
So he labored and he financed actually his own journey.
Yes.
It says, "For you yourselves know how you ought to follow us, for you are not disorderly among you, nor did we eat anyone's bread free of charge, but worked with labor and toil night and day, that we might not be a burden to any of you, not because we do not have authority, but to make ourselves an example of how you should follow us. For even when we were with you, we commanded you this," and this is the important part, "if anyone will not work, neither shall he eat. For we hear that there are some who walk among you in disorderly manner, not working at all, but are busybodies." And this talks again about the idleness.
I think that's further re-emphasized somewhere in Proverbs, I'm pretty sure. All right. It's this idea that as parents, we ought to bring up our kids with a work ethic, with a standard of work ethic, right? Work is an essential part of life. Just to summarize from a Christian point of view, we work first and foremost because God works. We also work because our work glorifies God. It glorifies God because it puts to work the talents with which we were given. And I'm not just talking about a talent from an artistic point of view, in a sense that you're able to be an engineer, you're able to be a dentist, and you're able to do engineering as well, right? I'm talking about this idea that you have breath inside you, right? You're healthy. You're able to put that into work and put that in a very positive way towards the economy, towards your neighbors, towards your friends, towards, towards the population as a whole, right? You contribute very positively into the progression of the economy moving forward, right? Their role, ways of glorifying God, because you're putting to work the talents with which you were blessed with, as opposed to, like I mentioned, that servant who puts his talent in the ground and buries it. But then also we work because ultimately it becomes a sacrificial act, right? In a sense that we don't just work for ourselves and our comfort. We work for our families. We work for our brothers and sisters all around the world as well. That is the real Christian outlook towards this, right?
And I think there's, like, it's taught in the Bible as well that there is a benefit from working. You don't just work and because, God told us to and because God did, but like it's even in Proverbs, there's a bunch here. Like, for example, in chapter 14, verse 23, it writes, "There is profit in hard work, but mere talk leads just to poverty."
Yes.
So it is rewarding. There is a profit. There is a light at the end of the tunnel. Like,
yes,
hard work does lead to, success. And I can't think of anybody who's a hard worker who isn't successful from.
Or you don't aspire or look up to in a way, because he or she becomes an example to the younger generations about how you ought to live your life, and you see them and you like to emanate them.
Well, put it this way: every superstar has come up from nowhere. Every person who's made it somewhere huge, somewhere massively successful, has this background story of coming from
Nothing.
a place where it was not. Think of anyone. That's as such. You'll see that that's the case, right? And it's God's talent manifesting itself. God's talent moving humanity forward, right? We have these technologies now. I mean, look at this microphone arm and with this fancy, I don't even know what you call this thing, mixer, right? All these lights and all this stuff around here. That's someone's work. To sit down and to behold, I can speak into this mic and I hear it now, and I hear it so clearly on the microphone, and then it can be posted on the internet, and so many other people can see it. That's marvelous. That's marvelous, right? It's really God's given talent manifesting itself, right? And I can't wait to see what happens of it, not just from a technological point of view, in the next couple of decades. Where will the world be during that time? I think we need to move towards the last part of the podcast, which is we're grounded now as to why Christians should work. This idea that it's a sacrificial act, that this idea that it's a manifestation of God's glory, this idea of manifestation of God's talents in our lives, and so on and so forth. So then we move on to why then work in light of things like sell all that you have and follow me. Matthew 19:23. 21, I beg your pardon. Right? Talk to me. What are your thoughts?
I've just got a question before we move on to that.
Sure.
We've established, like you said, why we should work hard, especially why we should work hard. My question is, what do we work towards? Is it our talents? Is it our spiritual life? Mix of both? What is it that you work towards?
I think you should be ambitious in every sector of life. I think you should be ambitious spiritually, right? To reflect on the Bible and to have prayer in your life, to have your confession father in your life, to have, liturgical services in your life, to be a Sunday school servant, to serve others, whether actually just to serve, whether it's in Sunday school, whether it's to help out the homeless, to be in some sort of a service. I think you should be all of those things. And I think you should be ambitious in your work life as well. And I think you're young enough, all of us here, young enough to be able to do that, right? And I think you should have, I don't think you should do one at the compromise of another. I think you should be ambitious and in a permanent state of growth in all of these sects, Kiro. And, It's amazing. I went around the other day and I asked, what is your deepest fear, to everyone? And anyone that knows the movie Coach Carter will know our deepest fear is not that we are inadequate, right? It's that we are powerful beyond measure, right? I think there's taking the pride away, given that Christ is the one who lives in me. I have nothing to fear. I can be bold, not from a prideful point of view, but from an ambitious point of view. Just like David's was against Goliath, right? You can have that kind of boldness walking with God. And I'm not saying it from a point of view where I want you to go shout Christianity from the rooftops or anything like that. I'm saying it from a point of view where you should have aspirations, and you should have aspirations that are quite high for you, right? And what will be. God's will unfold in your life, right? It will.
Yeah. Slowly
it will. I can guarantee it. Have God in your life, have scripture in your life, and it will manifest. You know, one of my favorite verses in Genesis is, and the Lord was with Joseph, and he was a successful man, even as a slave, you know. But moving on to that question, why work in light of verses like Matthew 19:21? Sell all that you have and follow me. Your thoughts on that before we wrap up?
Well, go ahead.
I just want to focus on the part it said, if you want to be perfect, and perfect is mentioned a lot of times in the Bible. The Psalms, it says that the law of the Lord is perfect, converting the soul.
Yes.
And a few chapters back in Matthew chapter 5.
You shall be perfect just as your Father in heaven is perfect.
Right before that, though, he was talking about loving your enemies.
Ah, yes.
And so this is actually, I think, when he's talking to this rich man,
yes,
it's a kind of a segue to saying, actually, yes, you should love your Lord, and you've done that. You've kept all those things from your youth.
Yes.
But when he's asking him to sell all that he has, it's a commitment that he has to make, because it also says that you cannot serve two masters. And so you have to have the foundation, which is our Lord Jesus Christ, and everything else is built up around it. I think the message for this center.
Yeah.
You have to have God in the center, and nothing can distract you, which can be riches.
But that reminds you of the verse, seek the kingdom of God and his righteousness, and all these things shall be added unto you. Yeah.
Thoughts, George?
Well, the question is, why work in light of sell all that you have and follow me? If you sell all that you have and follow God, you will still have to work. I don't know how many of us have been to a monastery in Egypt here, but whenever the monks aren't praying, they are still, they're working. They're working the field, they're working in the, whatever it may be, but like they still, and it's pretty hot out there in the desert of Egypt.
Yes.
So like it is hard work for them too, even though they don't have any earthly, materialistic things, but they're still, in the field every day working, and they, their only thing they know is the monastic life. They don't know anything.
If anyone wants to look up to a way of life where there's discipline in work, you need to go check out the lives of these monks. Their discipline in work is just next level. It's OCD to a whole nother level, I think, anyway. They'll probably hate me for saying that, but I'm telling you, I've never seen discipline towards work. And I spent 40 days at a monastery, as part of my training to become a priest. But not just that, I've stayed at many, many monasteries before. And man, the stories that I have about the routines of these monks, goodness me.
Sorry if I could just mention here. In fact, the work is such an integral component of the monastic life, because without the work, then they're much more prone to the wiles of the devil and so on. There's actually a section that I took out from St. John Cassian's book, Institutes. Yes. He said that the monk who works is attacked by but one devil, but an idler is tormented by countless spirits. And so work is absolutely important. We see an example of that someone by the name of Abbot Paul, who lived in the Peruvian desert. And he was absolutely satisfied with the plantations. He had date palms, he had a small garden, yet he still decided to work. And he would actually collect the leaves throughout the year. And these were palm leaves. He would make embroidery out of them. And at the end of the year, he would actually burn it off, in the sense that it helped nothing to him at all, but it occupied his time and prevented him from the attacks of the devil.
Amazing.
It's amazing stories.
And work does have a protective aura that comes with it. But I just want to hone in on this sell all that you have and follow me. And what do we have? We have a story of a rich man, a rich ruler of some sort, right? Let me read it to you. Now behold, one came and said to him, "Good teacher, what good thing shall I do that I may have eternal life?" So we have someone here coming to seek eternal life. And for whatever reason, for many good reasons, he thought that Christ would be the right person to ask this question. And by the way, it's very important that we ask the right question to the right person. We see here that this person comes and he asks the right question to the right person. "Good teacher, what good thing shall I do that I may have eternal life?" So he said to him, "Why do you call me good? No one is good but one, that is God. But if you want to enter into life, keep the commandments." And he said to him, "Which ones?" Jesus said, "You shall not murder, you shall not commit adultery, you shall not steal, you shall not bear false witness, honor your father and mother, and you shall love your neighbor as yourself." What do you think about that? Any thoughts on that? Does anything stick out to you there?
The main thing that stood out to me was, he said, "No one is good except my Father. Why do you call me good?"
Yes.
This is a little bit deviated from this topic, but
yes.
Is Christ not a perfect human being?
He is. He is a perfect human being, and Christologically speaking, he's ridding himself of certain divine attributes in order to represent man. Right? Very, very shortcutted way, because it is a deviation. But that's what's happening here. Right? It's the same reason as to why he got baptized. Right? There's no reason for Christ to be baptized. But he rids himself of certain divine attributes, and in humility comes and takes on these things, not just to be our representative, but to be a teacher, to teach us. Because that's part of the qualifications of being the Messiah. He must be a teacher. Right? And so here he demonstrates perfect teacherhood, if that's even a word.
Yeah.
Right? But aside from that, what are your thoughts on him responding and saying, "You know how to be good"? And he lists some of the laws of the 10 Commandments, and he ends it with, "You shall love your neighbor as yourself." It's something that should stick out to you there, especially given that you're all attendees of discipleship.
Well, these laws that Jesus mentioned are about loving your neighbor.
Right. The second table of the law, the second 6 commandments. Jesus summarizes them here. Now, what's bizarre about that? They're all laws as to how we should be towards one's neighbor, right? Effectively, love your neighbor as yourself. How do you do that? Well, you follow these 6 laws. That's how you love neighbor, right? What's astonishing about that, though?
He didn't mention loving your God.
Right. That should stand out. That should stand out, because nothing here from the first 4 table of the law, first 4 commandments, which is, "I am the Lord your God. You shall have no gods before me. You shall not use my name in vain. You shall keep the Sabbath." All 4 laws are to do with loving God. Not mentioned here. Not mentioned. Listen to how the young man responds. "So the young man said to him, 'All these things I have kept from my youth. What do I still lack?'" It's clear that he does these things and he fears that he is lacking. Right? He doesn't just go away content with the answer. He says, "I am lacking somewhere. All of these things I do, but I lack somewhere." I get on my jollies with this, because this is for me, Jesus at his, I can't say at his peak, but this is Jesus. There is no question that Jesus is the Messiah. And for me, this plays right into that. Jesus said to him, "If you want to be perfect, go sell what you have and give to the poor, and you will have treasure in heaven, and come and follow me. But the young man heard that saying, when the young man heard that saying, he went away sorrowful, for he had great possessions. Thoughts?
So is it the fact that he was more worshipping money than worshipping God? Is that why Christ told him to go sell all that he has?
I think you're all right. I think you're somewhere along the lines of my thoughts anyway. David and George?
Well, perhaps for him the truth hurt, because we know that our Lord Jesus Christ is the truth. And to say something like that to him requires a lot from him, from his end as well. He has to sacrifice so much. I think it was more difficult for him because he was rich. Whereas if he told it to someone who wasn't as rich, it might have been a little bit easier for him. He wouldn't have a lot to use. So there would have been a lot perhaps going through his mind. What would be happening to my future? How would I live? And I think that's what...
Hurting future sense, okay.
Yeah, maybe that was one of his only weaknesses, that he treasured his possessions too much, and obviously Christ would have known that. So he said, if you want to literally be perfect, sell everything and come follow me.
Yeah. Should we aspire for this perfection that this man is seeking for?
Of course.
Absolutely, right? Every one of us should be those things. We shouldn't just be looking at ourselves and saying, we fulfill all these commandments, we don't steal, we don't lie, we don't commit adultery, so on and so forth. But we should be aspiring to even a higher level of morality than that, a Christ-like level of morality, right? A biblical prescription level of morality. I think what's clear for me out of this is the fact that this rich man obeyed all the commandments for the sake of the commandments themselves, right? There was no Christ behind it. He did all these things because, for the same reasons that the Pharisees did all these things, because that's what they were told was good, and they kept it for the law's sake as opposed to for Christ's sake. It wasn't that this rich man had a lot of money that was wrong. It was the fact that he had a lot of money and was well-founded and rested on that at his foundation, and then all the other stuff came because of his complacency, right? He was in a good position to do all of these things. In a good position to do all these things. Me saying that, what does that remind you of? Somewhere in the Old Testament, someone's challenged as such.
Is it Abraham?
No.
Is it Job?
It is Abraham, but it's more Job. Because that's the exact allegation that Satan puts before God regarding the righteousness of Job. He says to him, you're comfortable. Right? You've made him comfortable. That's why he does all the good that he does. You're comfortable. And so we see that this man fails that test. We see that this man, if his possessions are gone, it may be that he will resort to these things. Right? That's the problem here. The problem here is not the riches. Just like the problem with Job wasn't riches. Right? The problem here is that God isn't at the center. Right? He's doing it for another God as opposed to the real God. He's doing it maybe for reputation. He's doing it maybe for the law's sake. He's doing it maybe for personal pride so he can feel good about himself. He's doing it for everything devoid of God. And that's very confronting, because when you're at that state, you must let go of that which you love. Now that is a hard thing to do. Very difficult things to do. Very difficult thing to do. And it's amazing. Listen to the next couple of verses that I think highlight this. Then Jesus said to his disciples, assuredly I say to you, it is hard for a rich man to enter the kingdom of heaven. And again I say to you, it is easier for a camel to go through the eye of a needle than for a rich man to enter the kingdom of God. When his disciples heard it, they were greatly astonished, saying, who then can be saved? But Jesus looked at them and said to them, with men this is impossible, but with God all things are possible. What's that tell you? See, this is what I mean. The message of Jesus has always been consistent. What does that tell you? What do you get from that?
I think we have to look at what Jesus is talking about when he says a rich man, because we see, especially in the Old Testament, a lot of the prophets were very wealthy. They had money. But I think we need to see what and it also says in the Bible, blessed are the poor, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. I think, rich and poor doesn't necessarily mean, what's your net worth, or maybe how, you use your money. Like, maybe a rich man is somebody who, brings in a lot of money, but doesn't consider, the needy, the poor, only materialistic things.
I think anyone that labels themselves a rich man is missing the point. Because as a Christian, your outlook should be, God has blessed me with this. Right? And this is what I want to sum up with. James chapter 1.
We also do say in the Psalms that the earth is the Lord and all its fullness. So in a sense, all the money that we accumulate, we have it because God has provided for us the talents too. And it's not necessarily our money, but it's God's. So when we offer back the money to other people, such as Cain and Abel, for example, in a sense, we're offering back to God. And it says as well in Proverbs that if you honor the Lord with your possessions, that the first fruits will increase, barns will be filled with plenty, and the vats will overflow with new wine. There's blessing involved, giving back what is God's.
And look, here's the thing. I think money in and of itself is not bad. Just like fire in and of itself is not bad. Just like technology in and of itself is not bad. What is bad is its flauntation. What is bad is having it without Christ, having it for its sake, having it as the end and not just the means. Everything has to be ends with Christ. Everything has to start and begin with Christ as Christians. And I think this verse perfectly sums up to conclude. All right? James chapter 1, verse 17. Actually, verse 16. Do not be deceived, my beloved brethren. Listen to this. He starts off the verse with do not be deceived, as if to say what he's about to say is shocking, but this is the truth, right? Do not be deceived, my beloved brethren. Every good gift and every perfect gift is from above and comes down from the Father of lights, with whom there is no variation or shadow of turning. Of his own will, he brought us forth by the word of truth, that we may be kind of first fruits of his creatures. So then, my beloved brethren, let every man be swift to hear, slow to speak, slow to wrath, for the wrath of man does not produce the righteousness of God. Every good gift and every perfect gift is from above, from the Father of lights. And so if I'm in a state of wealth, right? If I'm in a state of wealth, which, by the way, living in the 21st century in Australia, I would say 99.9% of the Australian population is in somewhere or another in a state of wealth, right? I don't call myself wealthy in and of myself. I call myself blessed with God's gifts. And as such, I have an ought and a duty with this gift. I have an ought and a duty with this gift. That means the breath, the luxurious breath that I have. And by the way, it is luxurious because there's no pollution or little pollution as opposed to maybe other places in the world. What am I going to do with that breath? I am blessed with eyesight. What am I going to do with that eyesight? Am I going to do bad things with it? I'm blessed with education. What am I going to make of myself? I am blessed with wealth. What am I going to do with this wealth? Am I going to use it for honoring God? Or am I going to use it for selfish ends? Right? Am I going to be someone who is looking only to me? Right? And I have this thing. I have this thing that I've had ever since that I was young. It's this idea of if a man asks me for help, if anyone asks me for help and I can, I will. Because that is effectively God testing me with the gifts that he's blessed me with. Right? That's God. If a man's down and he asks me for a hand up, I will stretch out my hand. If a man's down or a woman's down or anyone's down and comes to me and asks me for something that I can help out with, my answer is yes. It's even more so now as a priest than when I was a layman, because this is what I'm dedicated to. I have to be ambitious in life just like you have to be. That's why we have things like this, the podcast, right? This is a work of ambition. This is a work where we hope the word of God can be brought forth to people that perhaps would not have it, right? We have to be active in the service. We have to have ambitions, right? We cannot stay complacent. We have to go hunt for the lost sheep, just like David would, right? And so what does this all boil down to? To summarize and to finish, it all boils down to the fact that anything that I am blessed with, anything good that I am blessed with, it's from God. And because it's from God, there is an art and a duty and a responsibility that comes with it, right? There's an art and a duty and a responsibility that comes with it. It's very clear that this man was doing it for other means, for other ends, right? Whatever good he was doing it for absolutely the wrong reasons. And there can only be one right reason and many wrong reasons. The only one right reason is Christ. And thus, Jesus responds to him. And I think the takeaway message is every good and every perfect gift is not the problem. It's what we do with it. It's what is our Christian understanding, theological understanding that we are rooted in terms of these gifts and what we do with them, right? You're called to excel. You're called to be good. You're called to even be perfect, just as your Father in heaven is perfect, right? And so these gifts become and should become a manifestation of God in our life, and we ought to do the Christian prescribed thing in the Bible with it, not the other way around.
Abuna, in saying that, if God has blessed you with wealth and you do donate, you give to the poor, you give your tithes to church, you don't use your money for evil, for your own selfish desires, you provide for your family, you provide for others, you're doing all the good things. Is it wrong to spend some money on yourself, or is it wrong to, for example, buy first-class tickets to go to Sweden and just look at the nice hills, snowy hills, or spend $200,000 on a car or something? Like, is that bad in and of itself?
If you're living an indulgent life, I would say that's bad.
But
as hard as that message is.
What would you say? But even though you're giving to the poor, you're doing godly deeds according with the doctrine of Coptic Orthodoxy. Is it still wrong? Here's
what you've got to consider. That first class ticket is how much?
16,000 or something.
16,000 for a first class ticket. 16,000. For me, that money could be, no matter how much you've given to the poor, that money could be for the sake of you giving up this little comfort. Or let's just even call it a big comfort. I mean, first class is all that. So let's just say giving up a huge comfort in your life. Let's say you go from first class to business class. What's the price of a business class ticket?
Not sure, boys.
Is first class 16,000?
Oh, Jay.
I don't know. It's
You've flown business class before? Look, I'll fly business class, but only with points. I'll never pay for it. If I accrue enough points, because that's not currency.
In saying that, Abuna, let's say you own a very nice house. Does that mean you should sell your house and live in a 2x2 shed?
I think it's your responsibility to provide for your kids and to instill in them Christian values, right? And to make sure that your kids are well provided for, that you buy in the best neighborhood that you can for your kids, for your family, that you make sure that they're fully equipped with everything that they can, not for yourself, but for your family. That's what a good provider does, right? He looks to make sure that their kids are going to good schools, that they're well located and given every opportunity to succeed in life, because that's your duty. That's what we just read. You quoted it, right? And not providing for them is considered what?
Denying the faith.
Right. So you're not the ends here. Your comfort is not is not what you're working towards here. It's you providing for your family. For me, Kiro, a first class ticket, that's indulgence, right? That's indulgence. And the Bible is very, very, very much against indulgence. The Bible's, I'm not saying, maybe, I don't know. Look, to be honest with you, it would be a really good conversation to have with your confession father, because I'm sure there is some sort of a balance out there, but I can tell you, scripturally speaking, it's deny your comfort. That seems to be the overwhelming scriptural message. Deny your comfort. Deny yourself any sort of luxury.
What about the part that says rest, for example?
Yeah, rest is not indulgence though.
But would you say that rest involves some sort of comfort as well?
Rest is comfort, but not indulgence. There's a difference between indulgence
what's
and...
indulgence, if you don't mind?
What is indulgence? That's a hard one to define. What is indulgence? I'd define indulgence as...
Like doing over the top.
Over the top.
Like you don't need...
The creme de la creme.
Yeah.
For me, Floyd Mayweather exemplifies and is the epitome of the word indulgent. But there's many others out there. I'm not just calling him out because I have anything against him. Right? Think about this. Your brother and sister somewhere in the world are in need. And you can perhaps supply them for half their lifetime with that first class ticket.
Yeah.
That's what it comes down to.
Well, let's say, I'll give another example. I think this might be a better one. You've got some $50,000 car. Why not sell that, give it to the poor, and just ride a bike everywhere?
Well, that's not... I mean...
I know it's a bit extreme, but...
Look, there's people that do that. There's people that do that, but that doesn't become a practical way of living. You also have to be wise, right? You can go to an extreme with that. You can say, look, I'm going to live in a park bench and all my dollars go to the poor, right? But then you'd be negligent towards your family. You'd be negligent towards yourself, right? That is not a godly prescribed way of living. We have, of course, monks that did that, but they did that for righteousness' sake, and they didn't have families that they had to provide for, right? There's a very specific clause behind it. It's not just radical for the sake of being radical.
I also think if you really like break it down, once you have like a car, a house, you know, you're providing food and I guess comfort and education for your family. Like you can't really get much more. Like at the end of the day, all the money in the world, like you can get a bigger house, but you're still a human being. You'll still be waking up every day. You'll still have to eat. You'll still have to, you know, keep your body alive. So I feel like once you actually look at what money can get you, it's really not much more than what everyone here would have now. Like you have a bed to sleep on. You know, you can eat whatever you like.
The difference would be indulgence.
Yeah.
You're wearing very fancy clothes. You're eating very fancy food. You're
Just
living in a very fancy house. Well, look, everyone and their talents. I mean, everyone has a different calling. Everyone will resonate with it in a different sort of a way. But I think we should all aspire to live the godly prescribed way. And the godly prescribed way is a life of sacrifice, not a life of indulgence. That seems to be the overwhelming message of Scripture.
Yeah.
The overwhelming message. With that being said, though, you know, there is nothing wrong with taking, I believe there's nothing wrong with taking your family at a very moderate level with a very, wise approach, taking your family for a good vacation somewhere. Staying somewhere nice, not indulgent, somewhere nice. Because there's some places that are just expensive for the sake of being expensive. Be a really good conversation to have with your confession father and a spiritual father, right? Any final thoughts? Thank you all for being with us. Thank you for tuning in to episode Why Work in Light of Sell All That You Have and Follow Me. We look forward to seeing you again. We apologize for the little blip that we had, the half an hour that we missed, but I do believe that we've covered everything. And we'll see you guys next time.